Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest teaching session in the course on technology and the future of medicine. Today we're honored to have the Dean of Science, Jonathan Schaeffer, speaking on artificial intelligence and games. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. Today's a fun talk for me. I hope it's going to be fun for you. At any time, please feel free to interject a question. So the first thing you have to know is that I have the world's greatest job. You may aspire to have the world's greatest job, but I actually do. You see, when I was a student, actually before I became a university student, I just loved playing games. Board games, card games, whatever. Games were fun. And then I got into university and got into computing science and became interested in this area of computing science called artificial intelligence, where you try and make computers do intelligent things. And I thought, wow, I like games, I like computing, what if I marry the two? And so I started developing game playing programs. And so I've built a career out of developing game playing programs. And so it's a great job because the university pays me to play games. So I have research grants. I get to hire fascinating students to work with me on interesting game-related problems. I get to buy all the latest games. And if you ever come into my office and you find me playing a game, I am not wasting time. It's research. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So what we've done here at the University of Alberta is build the world's largest research group that uses games for artificial intelligence research. We are not doing research into games. We do research into artificial intelligence. And rather than do some of the more classic applications, I like to use games as my test bed. When I was a graduate student, people said, oh, you should demonstrate your artificial intelligence in medical diagnosis systems, for example. And I thought, I don't want to learn medicine. Or somebody, suggested, there's a whole field of using artificial intelligence to play judge and jury. No, I didn't want to do that. I loved games, so combine my personal interest with my professional interest, and that's what we do. So we started out looking at all the classic games, chess, checkers, Go, poker, things like that. And then about 10 years ago, we branched out into commercial games, and we work with companies like BioWare and Electronic Arts. And I'm very proud to say that we've developed game technologies that is shipped into commercial games that cumulatively have sold perhaps 10, 15 million copies around the world. Not that our technology was why people bought it, but it was certainly one of the considerations in the games. So what is AI? This is actually a very difficult question because I'm very bad, and all computer scientists are very bad about using acronyms, and whenever I go into a conversation I talk about, yeah, I do AI. And I've had some of the most embarrassing conversations you can imagine because it really depends upon who's in the room as to what AI means. The artificial insemination acronym has caused some really difficult conversations that I didn't understand at the time with some people in agriculture because they just didn't understand why I was playing games with AI. But what can I say? Anyway, AI is a great Scrabble word because it is a three-toed sloth from South America. And actually, it's a very apt description of AI because it's slow and it climbs trees. And what AI is it's a technology that searches trees, and many people would argue it is a very slow technology. So, artificial intelligence, no more acronyms. What we're trying to do is make computers do intelligent things. Not just do word processing or control an elevator, go up and down, but to have it do something that you and I would consider, quote, intelligent, unquote. And when you start looking at the breadth of things that AI does, it's really impressive because it's got to do logical reasoning. Part of intelligence is vision and interpreting what you see. Language, like what I'm doing right now, learning, creativity, and writing a book, composing a sonnet, robotics, the physical movement, planning, etc. What we do, what you and I do, is utterly unbelievable. Look at what I'm doing right now. I'm talking to you. I'm making up words as I go, and I'm doing it instantaneously. And you're processing that information, and hopefully, if I'm clear enough, you're actually understanding it. But at the same time, I'm controlling my body, I'm moving my arms around, and I'm also processing vision, my sight. Look at the amount of detail. Just look at the image that you're staring at. Look at the detail, the colors, the shapes. And every one of those shapes that you can recognize them, and you can do that instantly. It's all very impressive what we can do with our brains. So what's going on is something so profound that most people don't even understand what's happening. We have a computer revolution happening, and it's been going on for 30 years, 40 years, and we all know about it. But what it really is computer evolution. Because computers are forcing us to rethink what it means to think. Let's play a mind game. Let's go back 100 years. The year is 1913. I'm going to give you a little box, okay? I'm not going to tell you what it is. Here's a little box. And I'm going to tell you, this thing is going to correct your spelling mistakes. This is the year 1913. A black box. You can even drop it. It doesn't break. What is it? It's hard. It's going to correct your spelling mistakes, and it's going to fix your grammar. Unbelievable. Because fixing spelling mistakes, something that you and I think is trivial today, and it is trivial technology by our standards, is something that requires intelligence. There's a lot of information you require to fix spelling mistakes. You have to understand words and dictionary and all sorts of things. Unbelievable. And yet we take it for granted today. Let's go back 50, 60 years. You get on an airplane. The airplane flies itself. The pilot sits there and in theory could just, be reading a book because the plane can take off. It can fly in 3 dimensions through space. You're inside a bullet, a giant bullet, and it's going at hundreds of miles an hour. And it's going to land on a dime at an airport halfway across the country. And it's all controlled by a computer. Incredible. Unbelievable. I just got back from Seattle last night. Ho-hum, okay, yeah, there was an autopilot, it did it. It's all standard technology. Look at how our world has changed. Look at how our mind has changed. Look at how our perceptions of intelligence has changed. We have so much artificial intelligence technology around us, we don't even notice it. It's all there. Which is why I believe that one of the most profound contributions of the 20th century is the realization that intelligent behavior can be realized by non-information processing architectures. This black box can do things that we think only humans can do. Dogs can't do it. Bears can't do it. Insects can't do it. Intelligent people can do it. But what a revolution. I don't want to get into the religious aspects of it, but think how profound it is that this gift of intelligence that we have can be mimicked by this black box, which is rock. It's rock. It's silicon. And there's some electricity pulsating through these, call them little narrow tunnels inside this black box. And it's got the ability to do things that you and I can do. And it's not the only model. There's quantum computers, there's DNA computers, there's all sorts of other computers. What a profound realization that our brain isn't unique, that some electricity and some rock can do what you and I think is most special and most unique about us being human. It really is an incredibly profound realization. Forget about the airplane and the computer and refrigeration and all the things that were discovered in the 20th century. Without a doubt, in my opinion, the most profound intellectual contribution is the realization that intelligent behavior is not uniquely human. So the problem we're facing in AI is one of the credibility. We started off as a field thinking about AI, it was this big, and now things like spell checking, as we've talked about, nobody considers an AI anymore because we know how to do it. It's easy. So AI isn't this big, it's this big. And autopilots, like flying an airplane by itself, that's not AI anymore. We know how to do it. So AI is this big. And as we work towards understanding what we call intelligence, the mysteries disappear. What we thought is intelligent behavior has now become smaller and smaller and smaller, because most of intelligent behavior we can do very simply using methods that are almost trivial. Is that what intelligence is about? It's kind of scary. So when we talk about intelligence, we actually have two different types of computers with different architectures. On one side, you've got the human brain, something evolved by nature, very complex piece of machinery, soft tissue, lots of electrons, little computer processors inside, things called neurons, synapses. On the right side, you've got the more traditional hardware version, say a desktop computer, lots of wires, circuitry, rocks, nothing living, nothing that you and I would ever call alive inside that architecture. But these two things, the brain and the computer, are fundamentally completely different, and yet they're both doing what we would call intelligent behavior. And so if you have completely different architectures for solving a problem, it's not a surprise that you're going to get different solving methods. It's like flying. We have the biological model how to fly. Look at airplanes, they flap their wings. And of course, when people tried to build flying machines, they built machines that started to flap their wings, and we quickly discovered that it didn't work very well. That's why we have jets today. So when you come up with a different architecture, you may have different solving methods. And so humans are very good at abstract reasoning, asking the who, what, where, when, why, how type of things. Very soft kind of, imprecise kind of information. But the computer is very good at what ifs. If I do X, then what if you do Y? And what if Z happens afterwards? It can look through all the possibilities, consider all of them if it wants, one after the other, methodically. This, then that, then this, then that, then this, then that, as deeply and far ahead as you want. When you look under the hood of a computer, like this little one here that just sits on your finger, it's going to, as we'll see, exhibit some intelligent behavior. It's smart. But when I start explaining some of the things that it does, you're going to say, that's not smart, it's dumb. So I have this computer which is going to do some really dumb things, but it's going to result in intelligent behavior. And some people say, this is a paradox. How can you do something in a really stupid way and the end result is intelligent? It's bizarre. But what it really goes to the more fundamental question and at the heart of this profound realization of our understanding of intelligence, really goes to the heart is, what is intelligence? 100 years ago, you would say if you could do spell checking, you were intelligent. Right now, I don't think you'd use that. Spell checking is like, it's boring. We know how to do that. So let me give an example of this. And I'm going to use mostly games through my talk. Here's a famous example, 1997, chess. 1997 Deep Blue chess machine played Garry Kasparov for the world, played Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, in an exhibition match. This was not for the World Championship. Basically, IBM, who built the team to do Deep Blue, dangled $1 million in front of Garry Kasparov and said, will you play the computer for $1 million? And he laughed and said yes. And then he didn't take the match very seriously, and he made a fool of himself, but he was $1 million richer. And for $1 million, some people might be willing to make a fool of themselves. So here I just want to show you the end of a press conference. Garry Kasparov played the predecessor of Deep Blue in 1989 and crushed it. He played it again in 1996 and laughed it off and played really badly in the first game, and he lost, but he went on to handily win the match. He was very confident in 1997. As you see the video, take into account the following. It was a 6-game match. In the first game, Deep Blue was in trouble, but by the end of the game, it was a draw, and then all of a sudden, Deep Blue made the worst move on the board and immediately lost. Afterwards, it turned out that there was a bug in the program. The way the program works is it examines each of its moves and it sorts them in order from best to worst. And of course, when it comes time to move, you choose the best move, right? The bug was that under certain rare circumstances, the program sorted the moves from worst to best, and it made the worst move on the board. And so Garry Kasparov miraculously won the first game. Game 2, Deep Blue played unbelievably well. Beautiful game. And Garry Kasparov was dead lost. The program then made the obvious move to win the game. I was in the audience, grandmasters were in the audience. It was the obvious move, and Kasparov resigned. It turns out that the obvious move was a mistake. In that position, there is an incredible miracle draw for Kasparov. Something that shouldn't even be there. It's a fluke. Nobody saw it at the time. Nobody saw it the next day. It took a few days of deep, deep computing and analysis to find that there really is a miracle in the position, and Kasparov can draw. And so he actually resigned in a position where it was drawn. But he was dead lost beforehand. So in some sense, it was Deep Blue's good fortune. Games 3, 4, and 5 were drawn, and in the last game, I have no idea what happened. Garry Kasparov self-destructed. He played like a beginner, and the game was over in half an hour, less than 20 moves. He was just wiped off the board. Not because Deep Blue played well, but because Garry Kasparov just made mistake after mistake after mistake. So here you're going to watch at the video, you're going to see the closing, the end of the game, the very last game when he resigns, and you'll see him walking off the stage shaking his head. You're going to see him at the press conference, and you're going to see typical human reasoning. He ignores the first game, which he won, because of course he won it. But he says, you can't count today's game, game 6, because I didn't really play. And you can't count game number 2, because it should have been a draw. So I really won the match. Oh, come on, give me a break. Anyway, you'll see one of the problems with human ego. One of the interesting things is you're going to see a row of 6 people. The first person, the person closest to you, is an interesting person, and the 5th person down the line is also an interesting person, and I'll point them out afterwards.
As long as I could keep under pressure, forget today game. I mean, Deep Blue hasn't won a single game out of 5 because, again, game 2 I resigned when I could force a draw. Now, force a draw. Now, if somebody has another opinion, stand up and tell that the position was not a draw. Game 2 was resigned in a completely drawing position. Is it the correct statement? No, is it the correct? No, I just want, no, it's important. Is it the correct statement, Mr. Benjamin? Game 2. Final position was draw. Now, very important. Now it was recognized that Deep Blue made a bad mistake in a completely winning strategical position, blundered a perpetual check.
Okay, he discounts the game today and he discounts game 2, and, who cares? He lost. It doesn't matter what excuses. The person closest to us in that row, his name is Ken Thompson. He's the inventor of the Unix operating system. Some of you may have heard of Linux, which is a successor of it. Certainly my Mac is based on Unix operating systems. Most operating systems today are. But number 5 in the line is a very interesting person. His name is Murray Campbell. Born in Edmonton, his mother and brother still live here in Edmonton. He did his bachelor's degree here at the University of Alberta, did his master's degree at the University of Alberta, went off to the US, did a PhD at Carnegie Mellon, joined IBM, and he's one of the 3 co-authors of Deep Blue. So people don't know this, but Deep Blue has a very strong Canadian connection. One of the 3 authors is from the University of Alberta. Here's the boxing scorecard for the match in 1997, which sort of illustrates the fundamental differences between the human architecture for problem solving, for intelligence, and the computer architecture. So if you take a look at Kasparov versus Deep Blue and you compare them by their height, they're both pretty similar. Deep Blue is a little bit taller. The difference is in the weight. Kasparov is quite a svelte, 176 pounds, very muscular, plays a lot of tennis. Deep Blue is 2,400 pounds, a real heavyweight. Literally looks like a refrigerator, very boxy, 6'5" tall, has a door that opens up. It's quite cool. There's shelves inside where you can store your beer, and so it's very interesting to be able to have a cold beer while you're playing chess against the computer. Garry Kasparov was 34 years of age at the time. Deep Blue was a half a year old. Now that's a bit misleading. The computer hardware, the body which housed the intelligence, was only 6 months old. But the software, which is the brains, the intelligence, had been evolving for about 10 years. Garry Kasparov, in his human architecture, had 50 billion computers. The computers are called neurons. They're very simple computers, but they are computers. 50 billion running in parallel. Deep Blue had 512 computers, or processors as they're called. Deep Blue's processors were much more complicated. They could do many things at once, whereas Garry Kasparov had 50 billion, each of which could do one thing at once. Garry Kasparov, despite the fact that he had massive computing advantage, could not use that at full speed. Typical human, he could only analyze about 2 chess positions per second. Despite that massive computing power, that's all the speed that we have. Our human brains make up for speed by parallelism. They can do a lot of things concurrently. Deep Blue, on the other hand, could analyze in a single second 200 million chess positions. In fact, it was under-spec'd because it was capable of doing 1 billion. They just hadn't developed software that was sophisticated enough to use the other 80% of the capacity. Where Garry Kasparov made up for it in terms of his speed, very slow, is he had enormous knowledge about the game. He'd been studying chess for 30 years. He understood chess, he knew patterns, understood the strengths and weaknesses of these patterns at a very deep and profound level. Deep Blue's knowledge of the game is primitive. It knows the rudimentary rules of the game and a few patterns, and that's about it. And so you can clearly see the trade-off. Kasparov does very little search but applies lots of knowledge. Deep Blue applies massive amounts of search and very little knowledge. The one area which was pretty obvious in the video is Garry Kasparov has an enormous ego, typical of a successful human being. Deep Blue has no ego. It's very modest. It will play anybody, and it's very polite. It doesn't gloat or anything like that. On the other hand, I can tell you that the team that built Deep Blue does have a very big ego. So this clearly shows the differences in the two architectures and how they work. Let me give you another example. How many of you do crossword puzzles? Anybody? Still? A few. I like doing the New York Times crossword puzzles on the weekend, and I am pathetic at it. The New York Times on the weekend, they're the creme de la creme of crossword puzzles. They're very hard, and if I can fill in 10% of the grid, I'm doing well. Now, how do I solve crossword puzzles? I look at the clues. I read the clues, like capital of Alberta. Well, 8 letters, right? So, capital of Alberta, I know that, and I'll put in the word Edmonton, right? I have the clue which tells me something, and I can interpret the semantics of the clue, and I'll look at the grid and find the word and put it in. The program Proverb does the following. The first thing they did is they memorized all the past crossword puzzles that they could ever find on the internet. Past New York Times, LA Times, TV Guide, whatever. And the scary thing is, this program, when it gets a New York Times puzzle, it can fill in a third of the grid immediately because the clues are from previous puzzles. They're the same as previous puzzles. So I'll spend an hour on the New York Times and I might get 10% of it filled in, and it spends a split second and fills in a third of it solely because it has memory. Now, I'm not about to sit down and remember all the past New York Times crossword puzzles. I could if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. But it's easy for a computer to do, and bang, it's up to 34% accuracy. The other thing it does is it doesn't understand the clues. So if you say, what is the capital of Edmonton? It takes that clue and sends it out to a whole bunch of search engines. It'll send it to a medical database. Capital of Edmonton probably comes back with no hits. It'll send it to a music database. Probably comes back with no hits. It'll send it to a geography database, and it might get a few hits. It'll send it to a history database, and it'll get perhaps some more hits. And on all the pages that are there, where there are hits, it's looking for all the 8-letter words. And it might discover that there's an 8-letter word called Edmonton that appears fairly often, in which case it's a candidate to fill in there. And that's all it's doing. It knows nothing about the clues. They're just words. I know what the clues mean. I understand the semantics. And it doesn't help me because the clues are hard and I can't fill in the crossword puzzle. Whereas I score 10%, Proverb typically scores 97, 98% on the New York Times puzzles. I feel so stupid. And what's even worse, I know the clues. I understand the clues. And it doesn't. And this shouldn't be a surprise because information retrieval without understanding the information is a powerful technique. I mean, that's how Google works. That's what a search engine is. You just put in a bunch of words and it comes back with the answer. And amazingly enough, what you're looking for is often the top hit. Google doesn't understand what you're asking. It's just doing a mechanical search. So again, there's a gap between knowledge that we use and search, which the computer uses. Two different architectures, two fundamentally different approaches. So I don't create intelligent behavior. That's not what I do. My role, I believe, is to create the illusion of intelligence. There's something about intelligence that we don't understand yet and that I haven't been able to put into a computer, and that's free will, independent thought. Right now, my computer programs, in some sense, are idiot savants. They'll only do what I program them to do. And they don't have the freedom, the independence yet. But if we ever figure out how to do it, then maybe I'm not going to be creating the illusion of intelligence. Maybe I really will be creating intelligence. Of course, there is such a thing as artificial stupidity, and some humans try to create the illusion of intelligence too, a la Homer Simpson. Okay, what I want to do now is talk about a variety of areas of artificial intelligence, and most of them I'm going to use games, because that's an area that's close to me. I'm going to show you how these areas are being used in artificial intelligence to advance the state of the art. Although you may think games are trivial compared to the real world, the fact is that games were one of the founding initial grand challenge problems of artificial intelligence research, and a lot of the technology that we've developed for games has had much wider applicability. So, it turns out, what is the most visible artificial intelligence application that's used in the world? It's games. Yeah, there's lots of artificial intelligence applications out there, but if you just look at the number of units sold around the world, it's games. Because many games have artificial intelligence inside. For example, you're trying to create realistic behavior. You want to have characters in Grand Theft Auto, for example, that behave in an intelligent-looking way, or create realism, right? You want characters that act and behave in a realistic way. Or you want to have realistic conversations. That's for our artificial intelligence. Or maybe you're playing a real-time strategy game, World of Warcraft, something like that. You need to have computers that are making real-time strategic decisions. All of this requires artificial intelligence behavior. And so hundreds of millions, maybe billions of games have been sold worldwide in the last few decades. By far and away, computer games are the biggest application of artificial intelligence technology. If you're interested, you can look up this game. It's now about 10 years old, but it's still relatively unique in the world. The game is called Facade, and this is a screenshot from it. It was the first, what I'll call, real computer game. You know, World of Warcraft, Grand Theft Auto, choose your favorite BioWare game. they're all sort of fantasy, they're all imaginary. Facade was the first game which struck an emotional chord. One of my colleagues said it was the first game that he ever played where he felt like crying. And what these people did is they put in new technology to handle emotional responses. And so what Facade is, it's a game with a couple, and you're a visitor. You start off by knocking on their door and being invited into their apartment. And the conversation that happens changes dynamically based on what you say and some randomness. But it's, as you go through the conversation, you discover that the couple that you see here are having some marital difficulties. And it gets really awkward, the conversation and the directions that it goes in, because for many people it hits home emotionally, because I think we can all relate to some of these things. And it's actually it's a moving game. It's a very personal game, and it sort of took games to a brand new level in terms of creating realism. I mean, think of a Grand Theft Auto. You're never going to have a conversation about your marriage or your sex life or your intimacy with your partner. And this game here, Facade, sort of breaks the taboos and addresses those kind of questions in a game-like setting, which makes many, many people, including myself, I felt very uncomfortable playing that game. But when it comes to artificial intelligence in games, there's still a long way to go. Now, this screen is blank because I have a video, and as you already saw with my first video, there's some new incompatibilities in Microsoft, and although I gave this talk 4 months ago and everything worked, with the new version of Microsoft that I just installed several months ago and tried out this morning, they don't work, so I just have to escape for a moment into another program. So here's a game. It's about 5, 6 years old. But since things haven't really changed, it's a game called Oblivion. And you're going to see some really bad examples of artificial intelligence, and yet when this game came out, it was lauded as the state-of-the-art, groundbreaking, breathtaking artificial intelligence. So you're going to see this video, and it's a snippet that we just made, and you're in a fantasy world, and what I'm going to do is my character is going to go into a room with a shopkeeper. And I'm going to try and attract the shopkeeper's attention. I'm going to do all sorts of stupid things, and he's going to be oblivious. And you're going to think, come on, this is stupid. Like, when I start throwing thunderbolts and destroying his shop, you think you might even get a little bit of a reaction out of him, but no. But when I pick up a feather, he goes ballistic, like it's ridiculous. Then you're going to see me running away, and then you're going to see some other strange things. This is the state-of-the-art of technology, so let's watch this through.
Well met. Hello.
Hello.
What's new with you?
I heard people saying they ran into goblins around here not long ago. I can't stand those things.
Gods, earth, evil, foul-smelling little brutes.
Here's the shopkeeper. Jump on the desk. No reaction.
or it's locked in jail.
Of course I'm not going to pay the fine. Who do you think I am, right?
Then pay with your blood. Am I supposed to be impressed? What out?
Watch the spectator who joins into the fight. So these are the kind of things that give computer games or artificial intelligence in computer games a bad name, because clearly that's not realistic. There's a lot of work to do, and yet that was state of the art. Groundbreaking artificial intelligence. So we have a lot of work. And it's not because people don't know what they want to do, they do. But some of the things that we want to do on a computer are very hard to do or very expensive to do. There are things that we could do to make that much better, but they cost a lot of computer time. So if you gave me a 10 times faster computer, a whole bunch of things suddenly become possible. But with a computer that's really slow, people take shortcuts and cheat and do all sorts of other things to make it look as realistic as possible. And yet you can see there, it isn't. So that's the state of the art. What's the most successful AI in the history of artificial intelligence? The field of artificial intelligence really only started in 1956. It's only 57 years old. And as I told you before, one of the first grand challenge problems was games. And it took a long time, but finally we were able to build game-playing programs that were able to compete with humans. The first was a program I worked on in 1994. We had a checkers program, Chinook from the University of Alberta, which won the Human World Checkers Championship. And in 2007, I let my computers keep running for another decade or more. We solved the game of checkers. You know, like tic-tac-toe, we know with perfect play it's a draw. Well, checkers is now solved as of 2007. Perfect play is a draw. You will never, ever beat my program. Now, if you make a mistake, you could lose, but if you don't make a mistake, if you're good enough not to make a mistake, you can draw. And so checkers is superhuman since 1994. Perfect since 2007. In 1997, chess, we had a data point that said chess programs were as good as humans. That was actually a travesty. Most people, including myself, believed that Garry Kasparov was the better chess player. There was supposed to be a rematch the following year. IBM decided that a rematch was too risky, and so a couple months after the Deep Blue match, they disbanded the team, took apart the hardware, and said there would be no rematch. And as a scientist, that was a terrible decision, because science is all about repeating experiments, validating data points. So in 1997, we had this one data point that said that maybe computers were better than humans, but now we couldn't repeat it because Deep Blue was gone. So that was terrible. By the year 2013 today, it's pretty clear computers are much, much stronger than humans at chess. The game of Othello, interesting board game. It was made superhuman in 1997. Michael Burrows, a faculty member here at the University of Alberta, he's the one who did it. Scrabble became superhuman. In the 1990s, I supervised Brian Shepard's PhD thesis on that topic. Backgammon in the early 2000s became superhuman. And a long-running project here at the University of Alberta, poker. In 2007, we were able to build two-player limit Texas Hold'em poker-playing programs that were superhuman. And it looks like we're competing now with two-player no-limit poker and even three-player poker. And so you can see a lot of this work has been done at the University of Alberta, and it's pretty clear that, at least in games, computers are extremely strong. And again, who wouldn't argue that somebody who plays chess really well, like can even beat the human world champion, isn't intelligent? But of course, if you go to Deep Blue and say, hey, you know, that was a nice game of chess, let's play a game of checkers, has no idea what to do. These are all idiot savants. They're all programs that can do one thing and one thing only. What's the most used AI? One, without a doubt, the most used AI is email spam filters. This is, well, we all get spam. You all know how much we love getting spam. And all this is learning patterns. When you identify something as spam, the AI extracts all the components out of it, all the different pieces. And as you say more stuff is spam, it looks for the commonalities. Like if you talk about dream vacations, and you see 100 messages that are considered spam and they all talk about winning a dream vacation, well, then that gets flagged as spam, and it learns that it's a pattern that's in spam messages and flags it, and you never see it anymore. And so this is the most used AI technology. And it's all very simple. It's all just about identifying patterns and keeping counts. If something has a pattern in it that's been seen a lot in a spam email, then this must be a spam email. Spam filters are never 100% correct. They may be 99% correct, but they're never 100%. What's the biggest deployment of artificial intelligence systems? The first is Visa, and actually all the credit cards, detecting potential credit card fraud. Every time you use your credit card, it keeps track of your history. Where you bought it, what you bought, how much you paid, everything. Because what it's looking for is outliers. So if all of a sudden, as happened to me a few months ago, I bought something in Edmonton on the morning, and in the afternoon there was a big purchase of several $1,000s worth of stereo equipment in New York City. And that seemed very unusual, that I would be in Edmonton and within a few hours later making a big purchase in New York. Visa phoned me up and said, "This is unusual. Did you actually buy the stereo equipment?" And the answer was no, and it would not authorize the transaction. So this is actually a tremendously valuable technology that's out there. And it's behind the scenes. You don't see it, you only hear about it when something unusual happens. The biggest single company that sells products that uses artificial intelligence is Walmart. They have a massive AI system that studies buying patterns. There's a famous example, it's a true example. What they do is they, whenever you buy things, they look for correlations. Like if you buy flour, during Valentine's Day, you might buy flowers and a box of chocolates, right? And so it will see, there's around this date, February 14th, lots of people buy flowers and boxes of chocolates. And so there's a pattern. And so what a surprise if you go into Walmart around February 14th, you'll see right beside the flowers, the candy section. Because they want to make sure that when you buy flowers, you get also the suggestion that you should buy some candy as well. The famous example, and it is a true story, is beer and diapers. They discovered that there was a strong correlation between buying diapers and picking up a case of beer. Now this is in the US, we don't sell beer in Walmart. But the idea was, of course, many men were probably forced to go to Walmart to pick up diapers, and they would do that, and at the same time they would pick up a case of beer, and because there was a high correlation, the beer and the diapers were actually physically close to each other. Got to get those diapers, pick up something for yourself at the same time. And all the statistics show that this increases the amount of purchasing that people do. It's the same thing as if you go to Amazon.com and you look at a book and you want to buy it, Amazon's now going to say, well, you know, people who bought this book also bought these other books, as a way of trying to lure you into something similar that you might be interested in and that you go off and buy it. The other big AI system that's out there, which we don't know as much about, but clearly it's probably the biggest in the world, is the US military. Some of the things that we know about are autonomous vehicle navigation. They do have vehicles that will drive themselves on ground through using AI technology. They also have missiles that will seek out particular targets and have a vision system that will automatically guide them to their targets. Sophisticated data analysis, you have no idea the massive amount of computing infrastructure that's in the United States, monitoring telephone calls, electronic transmissions, purchasing, libraries, all sorts of things, all looking for patterns and hints or suggestions of terrorist activities. Face recognition is another good example. There are many systems in the US deployed, particularly in the military, where there are video cameras watching you, and it's all doing face recognition and building up databases of you so that it can actually track you. All this is really impressive technology. Of course, every technology has its good usages and its bad usages, and maybe the US military isn't exactly on the good side. Who are the biggest AI investors? Without a doubt right now, there's really two categories. The first is the search engines. Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft by far and away hire the most AI people in the world. Google wants to hire 1,000 more people this year with artificial intelligence, in particular machine learning technology. One of the areas they're pouring a lot of effort into is language translation, being able to translate, say, English into Chinese or German into French. Huge opportunities there. Microsoft pioneered the use of AI systems for their help systems. And you know, I know something about the AI systems that are out there. And I know the Bayesian learning algorithms that Microsoft use. But I don't know what they're doing wrong, but I have found Microsoft Help to be terrible in terms of asking it a question and giving me the right answer. So they were pioneers at doing this, and they claim it is absolutely wonderful. But based on my experience with literally dozens and dozens of queries, I find Microsoft Help to be particularly poor. Another good example is user preferences. I already mentioned Amazon.com, but Netflix is another example where you watch a movie and then it will suggest to you other kinds of movies that you might be interested in watching. And here's this well-known quote from about a decade ago from Bill Gates, that a breakthrough in machine learning would be worth 10 Microsofts. What about some of the cool AI applications that are out there? Search and rescue is a good example. They had robots that combed through the wreckage of the September 11th tragedy from a dozen years ago. Robots that could crawl through it in the spaces that humans couldn't to look, in that case, for life signs. The Mars rover has a lot of technology, AI technology. And Deep Space One was the first spacecraft that went up that was completely guided by artificial intelligence systems. You know, Deep Space One was going beyond our solar system. And when you think about it, it's like how many billions of kilometers away? It takes a long time for a message from Deep Space One to come all the way to Earth. Like, if Deep Space One says, oh my gosh, there's an asteroid in front of me, and it takes 15 minutes for the message to come back to Earth, and the scientists say, oh my God, there's an asteroid coming, we better turn Deep Space One, and then it takes 15 minutes for the message to get back to Deep Space One, the aircraft, or the spacecraft's probably been obliterated, right? So it's got to be able to act independently. It's got to be able to sense its surroundings. It's got to be able to see, and it's got to be able to take its own independent actions. Here's a good example of some of the cool applications. This is not ready for prime time. It could be ready. This is technology, and in fact, I want to emphasize that there's a lot of AI technology that exists today and is not being deployed because the public won't accept it, or in particular insurance companies won't accept it. Here's one that I desperately want. I came home last night about 12 this morning. I took a late flight from Seattle. It was a bit late. I'm driving home at 12:30 this morning. What the hell am I doing stopping at 4 red lights in a row when there's no there's no traffic going the opposite direction, and I'm stuck at these stupid red lights? Come on, right? I should just be able to go through the intersection. So the technology exists right now whereby you can have an attachment to your car, and when you approach within an intersection, the computer takes over your car and takes you through the intersection. Okay? Imagine that. Imagine that for all intersections, the computer takes you through and you regain control on the other side of the intersection. So over here, Here's a 6-lane highway. Here's a typical, I don't know if you can see it well, typical scenario that we see today. There's green lights and red lights, and when the light is green, you can see the cars going through. And you'll see the north-south traffic had red lights, so it stopped. Now the north traffic that's moving south is going, but the other directions are all stopped. And look how many cars are going through the intersection. So few, because it's all manual and it's all controlled by these traffic lights. Very slow and inefficient. Now, this is a 6-lane highway. On the other side, you're going to see a 12-lane highway. There are no traffic lights. When you get within the range of the intersection, the computer takes over and guides you through. Note that the computer has no preconception of a safe distance. We would always stay, depending on speed, far away from the car in front of us. But when the computer is controlled, well, there's a foot of space, that's enough. So watch the vehicles go and you can see the throughput. No red lights. Now some cars may have to stop until there's a sufficient break in the traffic that they can safely proceed through. But otherwise you can see there's a massive increase in the amount of throughput. We could do this today. People are too scared to have computers control their car, and the insurance companies are terrified. They say, well, how can we prove that this is going to work? I mean, if there's a slight mistake in the program, if there's a bug, my goodness, could have terrible accidents. But I want this so badly. Would you want to be sitting in a car with some of those close calls? I don't know. I guess after a while you would get used to it. Moving on, there's a realm of AI that's been working on something called serious games. These are games with a serious purpose, and they're meant to try and be as realistic as possible. So there's a whole bunch of games out there, medical-related games for training doctors, or military games to train commanders. Let me give you an example of one that I've actually seen. It's held in a 3D immersive cave. And the idea was to train doctors to go to Afghanistan. There's a lot of fighting going on. It's a very dangerous area. There are terrorists. And what do? Medical student, right? You come to a nice university, great hospital, you learn how to take care of patients, that's great. What do you do if you join the military and somebody says, okay, now you got to go to Iraq or Afghanistan or someplace like Somalia, and you got to treat people, not in a sterile hospital room, but they've just been shot and they're lying on the road, in a dusty road, and there's snipers all around you, and you only have the medical stuff, medicine that you can carry in your backpack. And this person's bleeding and you got to do something, and there's bullets whizzing around. How do you do that? Well, it's not like we're going to say, hey, great, congratulations, you got a U of A education, hop on the plane, and the next day you're in Afghanistan. Good luck, I hope it works out for you. I mean, how do you train to do that? You don't. You can't do it the hard way, and so what they do is they create these training programs which try and simulate those experiences, where you are trying to care for a virtual patient in Afghanistan, on the side of the road, improvising with the sounds and the whirring of bullets going by and the explosions and everything. And even some of these simulations are real enough to have the kind of smells to make it as realistic as possible. And so it's meant as a game, and you get scored, and you're always trying to beat your high score, but what you're trying to do is develop the skills and create the immunity to the sounds and the smells and the other things that are a real part of actually doing this kind of experience. And so there's lots and lots of work on developing these kind of so-called serious games. Lots of work on home robotics. You may have heard of Roomba from iRobot, Rodney Brooks' company out of MIT, which is trying to build commercial robots. The ones you can go to Canadian Tire and buy are for vacuuming around the house, but they also have robots to do pool cleaning, mowing the lawn, even snow shoveling. So lots of different things are out there for very simple home robotics. And of course, the future is wonderful in that area. But when you start talking about home robotics of the future, all these kinds of famous, sophisticated robots, they all require artificial intelligence well above and beyond anything we have today, unfortunately. And so in my prediction, it's sadly not going to happen in my lifetime, maybe yours. We'll see. Then when you talk about artificial intelligence in the future, we have to get into ethics. People have already talked about love and sex with robots. People take a robot and they tend to anthropomorphize it if it talks back to it. And yes, there are all sorts of interesting stories about love and sex with robots, and you can easily imagine this becoming something that might be more popular for lonely people or other types of people. There's even a book out on it, and very interesting discussion in there. Interesting question about do robots have rights? If you saw the movie Artificial Intelligence, or AI, done by Steven Spielberg, probably about 10 years ago, you want to question that. Do robots have rights? If they are intelligent and they're exhibiting intelligent behavior, do you have the right to pull the plug on them? I certainly don't have the right to pull the plug on you. What about a robot? Maybe the answer is it's okay to do that today, but what if a robot gets free will? Do we have the right to pull the plug on them? And believe it or not, there's a huge community who are arguing for robot rights and legislation to protect robots. And then there's issues like computers as a judge and jury. Computers can be built that have absolutely no biases. So do I trust a fallible human? You could put into a computer the entire set of legal proceedings of the whole world, and it could memorize it all. And there's a lot of research being done on that. What do you think of having a case, your case, being typed into a computer, and then the computer computes for a few minutes and says guilty, not guilty? Is that something we want? It's something that could happen very soon. So coming soon, many of these technologies exist today but are not yet pervasive, such as personalized healthcare, artificial intelligence systems that have complete data on you and can understand your needs and create an environment or an experience or a healthcare regime that meets your needs. Automated vehicles exist right now. We had a talk here in September from Sebastian Thrun, who's the inventor of the lead person on Google Drive, which is Google's self-driving car. It's driven now 2,500 miles on California highway without an accident, including all sorts of weird and wonderful streets, including going down Lombard Street in San Francisco, which if you've ever seen it, is a very steep hill with twisty, etc. Automated cars just revolutionized the world. The bottleneck isn't technology, it's the insurance companies. It's also the legislation. Right now, automated cars are legal in California, Nevada, and Florida, which means you can actually see on the roads a car driving with no driver. And some of them, they actually put a dummy there because people freak out if they see a car driving down the road, stopping for pedestrians, stopping at the light, if there's no driver sitting in the passenger seat. So, high quality language translation. Language translation still needs a lot of work to do. Non-industrial robots. There's a lot of robots with industrial applications. We need robots for non-industrial applications like home. I would love a robot to cook me dinner. I'm sorry, I really don't enjoy cooking. There's a lot of stuff about cooking that could be automated, and I think it's ripe for a robotic cook. We still have problems with conversations. You and I can have a meaningful conversation. We make things up as we go. Conversations that you have with a computer are largely canned. They're very limited. There isn't the creativity there that you need. Another thing that's really important these days is turning data into knowledge. We are a data-rich society and a knowledge-poor society. It's easy to generate lots and lots of data. How do you turn that data into something you and I could understand? We can, for example, map all the traffic patterns in the city of Edmonton and have this massive database of all the traffic. But how do you turn that into something that's useful, like getting the streetlights automatically coordinated properly? Those are challenging tasks. So what are the impediments to AI? The first is humans have a psychological resistance to artificial intelligence because of the sci-fi literature. How many people, the first thing I always get asked when I talk about these kind of impediments is, I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I saw that computer HAL, and it went off and killed people. Well, I mean, sci-fi stories like to have the bad guy, and in many cases the bad guy is a robot, and it just makes AI look bad. Any technology can be conceived for good or for evil. We like to think that we develop the technology for good purposes, but unfortunately the evil purposes always get a lot more play with the public. Another reason why we have problems with AI is it's largely invisible. Most of it's underneath the covers and nobody sees it. The fact that Visa and all your credit card purchases, every time you do it, there's AI behind the scenes. You don't know that. Google is using AI. You just take it for granted there's a search engine. Did you know these elevators have AI behind them? The elevators watch traffic patterns. They know, for example, that they learn automatically that at certain times of the day, coincidentally, when classes start and end, there's higher than usual traffic. And they know which floors that traffic is coming from. So if the elevator's free and has nothing to do for a few seconds, it automatically goes to one of the floors where it knows with high probability students are going to want to get on. So it's modeling the students and the traffic patterns of getting on the elevator and where it ends up going. So AI is there in so many different ways, you just never see it. And the other thing that's the big impediment is the lack of knowledge in industry. And in particular, Alberta, it's a very sad story. U of A produces many artificial intelligence graduates each year, and very few of them stay in the province because there are no jobs. Most of our graduates end up in Silicon Valley, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, companies like that, Amazon.com, Netflix. That's where they go because those companies recognize the technology. The fact that there's huge opportunities here in Alberta has not yet been discovered by companies who tend to use more traditional technology. So, the conclusion of my talk is that AI is a major part of your life. You don't even know it. You're using it, you probably used it today many times. But artificial intelligence will become an even more important part of your life. And you probably won't even know it, because again, it will be all behind the scenes. And the sad thing is that we have many AI technologies that are mature and are ready for use, and more importantly, can improve our quality of life. And it's only psychology, a will, insurance companies, legislation that's standing in the way from deploying these things. So thank you very much. I'd be very happy to answer questions.
Questions?
Hi, thanks very much for your talk. It was very interesting. I just have a question about how you're talking about AI in games, in particular poker. There's obviously a problem that might be associated with cheating and people using those programs online. I was wondering if, obviously that problem's already been considered. I was wondering if someone had come up with an answer for that one.
So what is the question about cheating in poker?
Yeah, so you said that you're developing an AI system for poker, essentially trying to embed the perfect poker player. So if someone online, for example, grabs that technology and uses it to win themselves a heap of cash,
Right.
There must be a way of preventing that from happening.
So first of all, we have the world's best poker software, and we've actually sold versions of it years ago. You could buy it, but only as a training tool, not to actually play online. That said, some people have ripped off our technology, and they use it on the web. If you, we don't play our poker program on the web at any of the gaming sites because it's illegal. If you read the conditions of use, in order to play poker on those sites, you have to be 18 years of age, and our software isn't 18 years old. So it's technically illegal. So we have to go straight and narrow. We don't break the law. Some people do, and they may try and make money off of it, and perhaps they do. They would never admit it. We'll never know, but maybe they do. But one of the things we've also been doing is gaming sites have contacted us to develop artificial intelligence to detect when a site is, a player is using a computer. Computers have different styles. So for example, a computer doesn't get tired. So if you put a computer on to the internet playing on one of these sites, which is cheating, and it plays for 48 hours straight, that's obvious that it's probably not a human, it's probably a computer. But one of the things we've done in our software is we put some booby traps in. So under certain circumstances, the computer does something stupid. And if you've stolen a copy of our program and hooked it up to the internet, which is hard to do, but somebody could do it. And if the site suspects that you're doing that, they can actually deal you cards that will initiate some of these scenarios, which should never happen, but if they do happen, it's clear proof that you were cheating. We also developed software to monitor everybody who's playing it, looking for certain patterns that might be indicative of computer play. Not only computer play, which we obviously want to catch, but also cheating between humans. Sometimes you'll see that there's 10 humans at a table and maybe 4 of them are all friends and they're collaborating so that they share information. We try and detect that as well. So it turns out that cheating is a big business for us. We can make money just developing technology to detect cheaters. Sadly, we don't make much money off of actually playing our computer program, just finding when other people cheat.
I was just wondering what the next game you're working on is, or are you currently working on solving something similar to that?
So there's 2 games that we're working on. The first is we're always working on commercial computer games. So we work closely with BioWare on a number of projects. The thing I like to say is that when I worked on my chess program, which was one of the world's best in the 1980s, the only person who played it was me, one person. I did my checkers program, it's on the internet now. You can go to the website and you can play against it, and a few hundred people every day play it. When we developed our poker program, we sold tens of thousands of copies of the software, and you can go online and you can play it. Hundreds of thousands of people have done that. It's great. But when you work in the commercial games and you sell a game, it's millions and millions, tens of millions of copies. So we're working on a whole bunch of technologies with BioWare, some of which hopefully will be deployed in the future. But if you look at the traditional board and card games, there's one game that has remained elusive. It's the Oriental game of Go. It's played on a 19 by 19 board. It's been resistant to computers for many, many years. The gap between the world-class humans and the novice computers was enormous. But the interesting thing, and again this shows the difference between computers and humans, humans use an extensive knowledge to play Go. They studied the game for decades to learn all they can about Go, and then they play it at a phenomenally high level. We don't know how to program in that knowledge. We don't even know how to learn that knowledge. And so what the computers do, no human would ever do. The computers use randomness to play the games. What they do is they say, oh, these look like the 5 best moves. I'm going to take this first move, and I'm going to play it, and I'm going to randomly generate a response for my opponent. I'm going to make a random move for me, and then for my opponent, and whatever. All the way to the end of the game, and then they'll look at the end of the game and say, oh, I won, great. That's one data point that says, if I make this move, there's a random sequence of moves that says I win. It'll do that 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 times and say, I've played 1,000,000 random sequences of games with this move, and I won maybe 62% of it. So this move looks like it's pretty good. And it'll try it for another move, and another move, and another move. And then it will choose the move which seems to have the highest success rate. They're random sequences of moves. And yet if you do enough of them, the power of statistics takes over, and you actually get high quality answers out of it. And lo and behold, computers now, they're not world class, but they're good enough to compete with the best players in the world. To give the best players in the world a good game. Not beat them, but a good game. And all the experiments have shown that if we had a 100-fold faster computer, we would now be as good as the best humans in the world by playing random moves. Who would have thought? And it just goes to show, you know, with a computer, you're using different techniques that are dumb. Random moves are dumb. And yet you can possibly get world-class play and Go. So those are the two challenges we're working on.
I was just wondering, have you tried playing Skyrim at all? Like,
Sorry, the which?
Skyrim, like the newer version of Oblivion. Have you tried the same things in it? Like, have they updated their AI at all?
No, those kind of games don't appeal to me. We have another person who's a big fan of those games, and he's the one who does all the playing and doing the videos. And what he does is he just loves collecting, finding stupidity in these games and then recording it. And he's got this library of hundreds of videos. And in his opinion, the world is moving forward very slow pace in terms of improvement. I just didn't bother going to get a new video from him because he still rolls his eyes. You want good videos, any game, I'll show them to you. So that's, you know. I like this one because I was involved with this one, and it's just dumb.
Hi, can you tell us a little bit more about where you're at with personalized healthcare?
I'm not doing anything on it. It's an application that other people are doing. And what this has to do, that I know other people are working on, is literally acquiring like many dozens, maybe even hundreds of different independent characteristics of human health, from age, weight, the obvious things like age and weight, to other things like analysis of blood, analysis of urine, all sorts of other kinds of tests. And just using the fact that you can put literally hundreds of parameters in for every person. And if you build a database big enough and you build it over time so that you get snapshots of a person over time, you can detect trends and you can detect patterns. And what they've been seeing, of course, is certain, say, diseases, for example, or certain kinds of health problems or health risks become correlated with certain patterns as a way of trying to be able to predict well in advance potential healthcare problems. The other thing they've been using, of course, and everybody in the health system knows that we're all unique and that there is no generic single answer that's going to work for everybody, and trying to identify the markers that allow you to differentiate between giving, say, this medicine to one person versus the other medicine to a different person. And really it's really just a data issue. And there's a rush out there to get good, high-quality data. And it's hard to come by. Unfortunately, in the healthcare profession, as I'm sure you all know very well, data is meant to be private. And even getting anonymized data can be challenging.
So, other questions? Okay,
Good.
I want to thank you.
Thank you very much.
very
Appreciate
much.
your time.